Ratchet and Clank Going Commando is widely considered by many fans to be a perfect sequel and perhaps the best game in the Ratchet and Clank series. For years I could never agree with this sentiment because I've always overlooked it in favor of its successor, Up Your Arsenal, which is a game that I have a lot of nostalgia for. But I do remember starting Going Commando shortly after beating the first game and never playing it past the first level for some strange reason that I can't for the life of me remember. A couple years ago I finally sat down and played it in its entirety, and once I got through the game I was simply blown away and kind of felt this strong sense of regret, because it took me a whole decade to finally realize that this game is just as good as everyone says it is, and so much more. Going Commando drastically improves upon its predecessor's shortcomings in every single way imaginable, and I know that sounds a bit overdramatic since it still retains the same basic core gameplay that made the first game so good, but it expands upon that core gameplay in a lot of really interesting and unique ways that makes it worthy of being called a sequel, or to take it a step further, an absolute killer sequel. The story behind Going Commando's development is a very interesting one. For starters, it was approved for development by the higher-ups at Sony 5 whole months before the first game had even been released. So while Insomniac were in the process of polishing up things with the first game, they had also begun conceptualizing lots of big ideas for the sequel. Despite getting a lot of positive buzz for the soon-to-be-released first installment in this new series thanks to test audiences, the team wanted to take things further by placing more of an emphasis on RPG-like elements that would fully immerse players in this new galaxy that they'll explore and reward them for overcoming challenging situations that they'll often find themselves in. They felt that implementing RPG elements was very important, as it would help the game stand out from other traditional platformers and provide a lot of variety that will leave players feeling satisfied. One of the biggest and most common complaints when it came to the first game outside of its gameplay was Ratchet's characterization. He came off as very cocky and abrasive, and that made him very unlikable in the eyes of many players. So Insomniac hired James Arnold Taylor to voice Ratchet, who up until that point was most well known for voicing Tidus in Final Fantasy X, and as much as I prefer Mikey Kelly, who voiced Ratchet in the first game, over James Arnold Taylor, I can't picture anyone else voicing Ratchet besides James Arnold Taylor. He gives Ratchet this very friendly and down-to-earth kind of vibe that wasn't present like that before, and he sounds very heroic and almost commanding at times, which is very fitting since Ratchet is a hero after all. It's no wonder that he's been voicing Ratchet in every single game going forward after this.
Clank? Uh-oh. It's okay. I can fix her. I promise.
It's been almost a year since Ratchet and Clank stopped Drake from destroying the galaxy, and they haven't been up to much as of late, spending most of their free time lounging around and watching TV and playing video games all day, believing that no one needs a hero anymore due to how peaceful the galaxy's been. That is until they're teleported into the Bogon Galaxy at the behest of the founder and CEO of Megacorp, Abercrombie Fizzwidget, who tasked Ratchet with finding a protopet, one of his most valuable experiments that's been stolen by a masked thief who plans on destroying it. I say he only tasked Ratchet with doing this because Clank is busy getting some more R&R, which comes back to bite him in the ass big time since he ends up getting captured and tortured by the masked thief. But of course Ratchet comes to the rescue right away like the best friend he is. As you progress, you find out that things aren't as they seem, with the masked thief eventually being revealed to be a woman who used to work for Megacorp as a scientist and was the one who created the protopet, but was unable to finish finding the solution to its violent nature due to the little creatures being rushed out to production. And at the end, it's also revealed that Fizzwidget isn't actually Fizzwidget, but Captain Cork in disguise.
This is bad.
Alright, just what the is going on?
After failing to get rid of Ratchet and Clank and to become the spokesperson for Drake's new planet, Cork decided that the best way to become famous again was to impersonate Fizzwidget and rush the defective protopets out to production so that he can save this new galaxy and be viewed as a hero once again. But Quark, as y'all know, isn't the sharpest tool in the shed, as things take a turn for the worse, leaving Ratchet and Clank with no choice but to clean up his mess. And save the day as always, of course.
Stay tuned, dear viewers, as I amplify the signal from this helix-so thingy and render every protopet in the galaxy completely harmless. Allow me to demonstrate. Mommy!
Wait, what did he just say?
Mommy!
I don't think the story is as good as the first games in my opinion, but it's still a fun journey from beginning to end. It's very tongue-in-cheek and doesn't take itself seriously whatsoever. I liked Angela's role in the story, being a clumsy yet smart rebel that simply wants to fix her mistakes and wish she appeared in more games after this. It would have been such a treat to see her team up with Ratchet and Clank occasionally at the very least. And it sucks that they literally retconned her out of existence in later games, with Ratchet being the last of his kind, which is total BS since Angela is clearly a Lombax, just like him. My theory is that the writers and devs simply didn't know what to do with Angela as a character after this game, which is somewhat understandable, but come on, at least have her make a cameo every now and then, or have Ratchet and Clank name drop her. The Ducks for Less serves as this game's primary antagonistic force that you face off against. They're basically a group of mercenaries that spend 75% of the game working for the masked thief / Angela and the last 25% for Fizzwidget / Quark. I like that these guys have no problem ditching their current employer for a new one when they get paid more. It just goes to show that these guys are willing to work for anyone and do anything to make that money. They're also given quite a bit of personality, more so than the blogs from the last game. Who are just bad guys doing bad things, and the Ducks for Less are basically the same for the most part, but there's a lot of cutscenes that show off just how comical these guys really are.
What's so funny?
Nothing, I guess. Prepare to die!
Oh, I forgot my wallet. Could you take care of this?
Perimeter defenses deactivated.
You forgot your change.
Quark being revealed to be the main antagonist this time around may feel like a tacked on part of the story to some, and it's actually true since the developers really missed Quark's snarky sense of humor and thought it'd be a good idea just to have him be the main villain this time around. My only problem with that is that they could have foreshadowed Fizzwidget being Quark all alone much better. Maybe have a couple of cutscenes of him getting angry and defensive whenever Ratchet and Clank say bad things about him, or at the very least act dismissive towards them whenever they bring up events from the previous game. Or have Ratchet and Clank search his office for something important when they break into Megacorp, only to find pictures of themselves and Quark himself plastered all over the walls. The only foreshadowing we actually get is in a cutscene where he says his signature catchphrase.
Your experts recommend that the experiment be liquidated. We will meet you at your deep space disposal facility.
Ah, yes, my cheap date proposal facsimile. It's heavily guarded, so make sure to use the password, which is, Quarktastic. Yes, toodaloo.
But once it's revealed that he's been impersonating Fizzwidget this entire time, everything starts to make sense. Like him purposely destroying Ratchet and Clank's ship or giving them the wrong password to get into this heavily guarded space facility. And not to mention his terrible grammar. I also feel like he gets off way too easily because he's not arrested for his crimes against the galaxy and is somehow able to get a job at Megacorp. You know, the same company that he took control over by kidnapping the real owner and CEO and sold their most dangerous experiment to many unsuspecting customers, which caused many lives to be lost in the process. He just gets a slap on the wrist by becoming a test dummy of sorts, and as funny as it is, it still feels like a real cop-out to me. Commando still retains the same basic core gameplay from the last game, where you travel to different planets, killing enemies and earning bolts, and using said bolts to buy cool weapons and gadgets. But this game introduces so many unique mechanics that make it a truly great experience. Ratchet feels so much better to control here than before, as he's not able to strafe. Strafing as a mechanic is properly introduced in the second level on planet Uzla, where you face off against this giant swamp monster who serves as the first boss fight. Strafing allows you to avoid attacks much easier, as you're not only able to strafe from side to side, but also backwards as well. RPG elements are also introduced in the form of health and weapon upgrades, as well as in armor vendors. This time around, your health, or nanotech as it's called in this series, is represented by these bolts at the top of the screen, and these bolts grow in size with each and every enemy you kill until a bright light flashes across the screen to let you know that your health just increased. This is way better than having only 4 hit points and having to pay a lot of bolts in order to increase your health like before. The enemies you face off against this time around are much tougher as well, so you have to buy a lot of armor in order to reduce the amount of damage you take. There are several sets of armor you can get all throughout your playthrough, and the more expensive a set of armor is, the more damage it reduces, with the Carbonex armor being the toughest set of armor as it reduces 90% of the damage you take at the cost of 1,000,000 bolts, which is totally worth it in my opinion. And it also makes Ratchet look like an absolute badass. Buying armor isn't really necessary for about the first half of the game, but it is once you reach the Ducks for Less HQ on planet Snivelac, where the game experiences a huge spike in difficulty, leaving you with no choice but to buy a set of armor. Going Commando has some of the series' best weapons by far, and I'm not going to go through every single one of them like I did in my last retrospective because I don't want to bore you guys and have this video be any longer than it needs to be, so I'm just going to talk about my personal favorites. The Gravity Bomb is a medium-range grenade launcher that launches powerful bombs and has a high blast radius, which makes it perfect for taking out large groups of enemies at once. And it will eventually upgrade into the Mini Nuke, an even more powerful grenade launcher that has a higher blast radius than before. It becomes less useful as you progress since enemies become stronger and take more damage, but in challenge mode you have the option of buying a Mega Mini Nuke, which does even more damage than before. Yes, that's right. Not only do the weapons gradually evolve and become more powerful the more you use them, but you can even buy more expensive and powerful versions of them, which can be fully upgraded as well. If that doesn't incentivize you to replay the game multiple times, then I don't know what will. The Secret Gun launches missiles that lock on and slam into nearby enemies that come within range of it, and can be upgraded into the HK-22 gun that launches up to 3 powerful missiles at once. It's a cool weapon that unfortunately gets outclassed by the Mini Rocket Tube, which is basically a rapid fire rocket launcher that is very powerful and becomes more so when it fully upgrades into the Mega Rocket Cannon. One of my gripes with the first game was that the auto aiming was extremely janky and imprecise, which made fighting enemies frustrating at times as I have to often stop and go into first person mode just to take them out. Luckily the auto aiming this time around is much better, much more precise and gets the job done. Back with the weapons, the Plasma Coil is a long-range weapon that shoots out small balls of electricity that shock and do a great deal of damage to enemies, and once it fully upgrades to the Plasma Storm, it'll shock multiple enemies at once, like some sort of cool chain reaction. The Bouncer is arguably the best weapon in the game. It serves the same purpose as the Gravity Bomb / Mini Nuke, being that it's able to take out a large group of enemies at once, and it'll do even more damage once it fully upgrades to the Heavy Bouncer, where the balls it shoots out and disperses become much bigger, which expands its area of effect. It may not be the most powerful weapon included here, but it's one of the most creative of the bunch and sure as hell gets the job done. On certain planets, you'll come across a red button which you can use to summon a black market dealer named Slim Cognito and buy weapon mods from him at the cost of platinum bolts, which replaces gold bolts from the last game. Weapon mods aren't needed in order to progress through the game, but rather a cool way of further increasing their damage while also encouraging players to find platinum bolts. There's the shock mod which allows you to shock enemies, the acid mod which slowly kills enemies by burning them, and the lock on mod which allows for more precise aiming and viewing enemies' health. My favorite mod is the acid mod for the Bouncer. Watching a dozen or so enemies slowly burn to death at the same time is just so satisfying to me. You have the option to get some old weapons from the previous game for free if you have a save file for it, which is a cool reward for returning players, but there's really no point in using these weapons since they're severely underpowered. It's hard to believe that these are the same weapons that Ratchet and Clank used to take down the Blarg, but it does show that the enemies you face off against this time are much stronger and more dangerous than the Blarg. Maybe the mega versions of these old weapons are much more capable of getting the job done, but I wouldn't bet on it. And last but not least, there's the Rhino 2, the successor to the Rhino from the previous game, and just like the Rhino, it's the most powerful weapon in your arsenal. But unlike its predecessor, it shoots out rapid fire missiles instead of several at a time. The only downside to using it is that you'll go through ammo a lot quicker, which is why you can find ammo for it in crates just like any other weapon, and it's so much better than having to constantly buy some like in the previous game. So that along with it being the most powerful weapon here guarantees that you'll be able to make short work of any and everything that comes your way. When it comes to the gadgets this time around, you've got old ones such as the Swing Shot and Grind Boots, which you acquire very early on, but you've also got new ones such as the Dynamo, Terminator, and Tractor Beam. The Dynamo is used to activate dynamo triggers that activate certain parts of machinery and also creates holographic platforms for you to jump on so that you can traverse through levels. I don't know about anybody else, but this gadget always gives me Green Lantern vibes. The Terminator can control the temperature of water, being able to freeze it if you need to cross some sort of path and thaw it out if you need to swim through it. And the Tractor Beam allows you to move all sorts of objects around, such as pillars, bombs, and its poor Inspector Bot. These three new gadgets alone are really good. They serve their use on many occasions and get the job done, but there's other gadgets such as the Electrolyzer, Infiltrator, Levitator, and Glider that bring up so many questions. Like, why do we need 2 hacking and 2 flying gadgets? Why not just have one of each? I much prefer the Electrolyzer over the Infiltrator since it's much easier to use and the controls for the Infiltrator can be really janky at times. And as much as I like the Levitator and Glider equally, I prefer to use the Levitator instead, since those segments are so much more fun and not nearly as frustrating as the Gliders are at times. The worst gadget in the game in my opinion has to be the Hypnomatic. Not because it's terrible, but this thing was introduced so late into the game that I wonder why it was even included to begin with. It basically allows you to take control of robots, which is fine I guess, but it feels like it was added very late into the game's development. I think a handful of the gadgets don't really need to be in here and probably should have been used in future games instead. One thing I really enjoyed about the previous game was the planets I traveled to and explored. Each and every one of those planets has such a unique vibe to them, a set of characteristics that made them immediately recognizable upon first sight, and while the planets to visit this time around aren't nearly as memorable as the ones in the previous game, there still are several that really stand out to me. The first is Barlow, a desert planet that's home to hostile raiders along with these crazy chihuahuas, and the last Gadgetron facility in the entire galaxy. Gadgetron, if you remember, is the same company that created all of the cool weapons that you used in the previous game, and its opening shot when you first arrive on a planet speaks volumes of how powerful Megacorp is as a company, quite literally driving any company that dares to compete with them out of business. Barlow also hosts the first set of hoverbike races that you can participate in, and these races are so much better than the hoverboard races in the previous game in my opinion. They're really fun, rewarding, and not to mention,
Dangerous?
why yes, very dangerous indeed. Megapolis on planet Endako is a big city that's filled with lots of skyscrapers, giant flying pizza cars, and is where Ratchet and Clank currently live. I like that Insomniac threw in a couple of Jak and Daxter Easter eggs, with one of them being an image of the two in Clank's apartment, and also this brief cutscene as well. Megapolis kinda serves as a stand-in for Metropolis from the previous game, but it's a complete opposite of it in every single way. Metropolis was this warm, urban city that perfectly fit in with the first game's dirty sci-fi aesthetic, whereas Megapolis is this very sterile and homogeneous city that has this corporate feel to it. Well, Megacorp does have a major influence over the city, so that has a lot to do with it now that I think about it. Tabora is yet another desert planet that I really like. Yeah, I know it's very lifeless and bland, but that's the point. This planet used to be a big healthy rainforest, but Megacorp came in and sucked all the life out of it by taking away all of its natural resources. Well, not all of it, as there's these desert crystals that you can collect and trade for bolts. But I tend to hold off on collecting all the crystals until I get the charge boots, as they allow you to travel long distances very quickly, and as you can tell, this desert's too damn big to be traveling on foot. Which is why there's this mining ship that you can fly to not only get around a level much faster and easier, but to also collect rare Ratanium, which you can use to upgrade parts of your ship at Slim Cognito's ship shack. You'll often come across certain areas in between levels where you're able to engage in space combat challenges, something that you occasionally did in the previous game, but is now a full-fledged side activity that rewards you with bolts for completing challenges, most of which require you to take out a bunch of enemy ships. There's a lot of cool ways to upgrade your ship, whether it be through cosmetics such as a new paint job and changing your wings, or in the case of weapon upgrades, getting an advanced shielding system, new laser cannons, torpedo missiles, and my personal favorite, electric mines. I like that the space combat challenges are a fun and rewarding part of the game, instead of just being an occasional thing you have to do in order to progress like in the previous game. It's one of the many things I really applaud Insomniac for expanding upon. The Mactar Nebula Resort is another place I really like because it's basically a space themed version of Las Vegas with a bunch of slot machines sitting around that you can use to earn a couple of bolts or health. And it has this Galactic Gladiators event that you can partake in where you have to complete all sorts of challenges that get tougher and tougher as you complete each one. These challenges could easily get boring and repetitive if you have to do the same thing over and over, but it does shake up things a bit by changing the rules on almost every challenge. Some challenges only allow you to use a specific weapon that has limited ammo, while others require you to kill a certain amount of enemies before time runs out. The hardest ones for me personally have to be the ones where you have to avoid getting hit, because I always spend more time trying to kill enemies rather than avoiding them. If you want to spend some time upgrading your weapons, then this is the place to do it, since you'll be faced off against hundreds of enemies, and you know the more enemies you kill, the more your weapon's level increases. The best level objectively has to be Silver City on planet Bolton. Where do I start with this one? Well, you have these 3 different paths that you can take, with one of them being this kick-ass grind roll segment that leads to this button that you can press to summon Slim Cognito to mod some of your weapons, and trust me, you'll probably need to for what's about to come. The next path leads to this underground hyper expressway that you have to navigate your way through by using the levitator, which leads to the third and final path right into the belly of the beast itself. The difficulty does ramp up quite a bit here, as enemies take a lot more damage to be put down, forcing you to use a lot more ammo than you normally would have to. They also come in larger groups instead of small packs, unlike every other level prior to this. Luckily, there's a lot of these little barriers you can use as cover for enemy fire to help mitigate the amount of damage you will inevitably take. I forgot to mention this earlier, but I'm so glad that the game pauses whenever you open your weapon wheel instead of you having to select the weapon in real time like in the previous game. That's such a godsend in these kinds of stressful situations. The level of Silver City is really well paced and action packed. I like how the action gradually escalates as you progress through it. I just wish it didn't end on such an anticlimactic note. Now that I've talked about the best level, it would only seem fair that I also talk about the opposite. Planet Gremlin is undoubtedly the worst level in the entire game. When you first get here, you have to collect 9 moonstones for the Mystic so that he can use his weird psychic powers to move this large snowball, and collecting these moonstones is a huge pain in the ass because of these damn Yetis. These things take way too much damage, like way too much damage, and it's way too many of them as well. Every time I try to escape, another one just appears out of nowhere to stop me. Like, get the fuck out of here, get out of my face, leave me alone, goddammit. And there's also these giant ice serpents, ice dragons. I don't know what the hell they are, but they're not hard to deal with, especially if you have the Rhino. Just be sure not to fall in the icy waters where they come up from because you'll instantly freeze to death. This level also has raritanium just like the desert on Tabora, but collecting it is impossible with all these Yetis running around because they'll destroy your ship before you can even collect any. I know I've been ripping this level a new one, pun intended, but there's an interesting reason why it is the way it is. So apparently a developer named Tony Garcia had to program this level in just 3 days because the dev who was originally working on it just stopped working on it or had something else come up that prevented him or her from finishing it. So instead of figuring out the code or just getting it from the original dev, he decided to start from scratch, and seeing as he only had 3 days to program the entire thing, it's a miracle that it's even somewhat playable. If he'd been given more time to work on this, then this could have been one of my favorite levels in the game. Like, imagine exploring this snowy hellscape, collecting moonstones and raritanium whilst coming across a couple of not so broken and overpowered Yetis every now and then instead of what we actually got. But then again, I'm getting way too ahead of myself. It's not hard to see why Going Commando is so beloved by many. It's an action-packed and ambitious sequel that corrects what little flaws its predecessor had while also expanding upon it in every single way imaginable. And it's also a fun thrill ride that rewards and makes you feel like an absolute badass for playing. Making Ratchet feel better to control now that he's able to strafe, adding lots of cool new RPG elements in the form of weapon and health upgrades, and being constantly rewarded for doing even the most mundane of activities are all just larger than life changes that make it hard for you to stop playing. The only thing I really dislike about this game is the excessive amount of gadgets, and as I said earlier, there's no reason why there are multiple gadgets that serve the same purpose as one another. We don't need 2 hacking/puzzle solving gadgets and 2 gadgets that allow you to fly. One of each is more than enough, and the Hypnomatic just didn't need to be in the game at all. This is more of a small hindrance rather than something that really weighs the game down. Other than that, Going Commando is a killer game that has rightfully cemented itself as one of the greatest video game sequels of all time. But after creating the perfect game and a perfect sequel, where does Insomniac go from here? Do they do the bare minimum by providing players with another copy and paste experience that's just as good? Or by creating a threequel that's bigger and better all across the board? I look forward to answering those questions with you soon and seeing your thoughts down below. And as always, this has been your boy Speedy, and I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace.
So, whatever happened to Quark?
I heard he was working at Megacorp.
All right, fellas, nice and tight now. So you tested this, right? Oh, wait, that's why I'm here. Oh, one more thing.